One forbidden kiss in the Highlands with a handsome duke, and everything changed for the grieving widow. The wind tore across the rocky outcrop above the loch, whipping Maeve Sinclair's black mourning dress around her legs like angry shadows. She pressed her hands against her face, trying to breathe through the fury and grief churning in her chest. "You'll sell the cottage, whether you like it or not," Angus had said, his face red with drink and resentment. "My brother left you nothing but debts, and I'll not watch you cling to what isn't yours anymore." Maeve had fled before she said something unforgivable. Now she stood on the hill where she and Robert used to watch the sunset, wondering how love and anger could exist in the same breath when she thought of her late husband. Footsteps crunched on heather behind her. "I said leave me alone, Angus," Maeve snapped, spinning around. "I don't need another lecture about—" She stopped. It wasn't Angus. The man standing there was tall, dark-haired, with amused eyes that softened when he saw her distress. A stranger in fine travelling clothes, slightly windswept, looking at her like she was a person rather than a problem. "I'm not Angus," he said mildly, "though I'm gathering he's someone you'd rather not see at the moment." "Hello, friend. If you've ever felt trapped between grief and the terrifying possibility of living again, this story is for you. I'd be grateful for a like or subscribe. And tell me, have you ever done something impulsive that changed everything? I read every response. Now, let me tell you about Maeve and the kiss that woke her heart. 1. Angus's voice carried up the hill, slurred and angry. "Maeve! Where are you, woman? We're not done talking." Panic flared in Maeve's chest. If Angus found her alone with a strange man on this hill, the village would talk for years. She'd be the widow who couldn't even mourn properly, who was already entertaining men while her husband's grave was barely settled. Without thinking, Maeve grabbed the stranger's lapels and pulled him down into a kiss. It was meant to be quick, performative, something to make Angus think she was with someone known, not hiding like a scolded child. But the moment their lips met, something unexpected happened. The stranger went still with surprise, then responded with a gentleness that made Maeve's breath catch. His hand came up to steady her waist, and for the first time since Robert died 18 months ago, Maeve felt warm, alive, real. She jerked back, horrified at herself. Below them, Angus appeared through the gathering dusk. He saw only dark silhouettes against the sky, a couple embracing, and his face twisted with bitter satisfaction. "Widows in mourning," he muttered loudly enough to carry. "Not wasting any time, I see." He turned and stumbled back down the path, taking his jealousy and suspicions with him. Maeve's hands flew to her mouth. "Oh God, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean I just needed him to think. He's my late husband's brother, and he won't stop hounding me about the cottage and the debts, and I thought if he saw me with someone, he'd assume—" She was babbling, words tumbling over each other. The stranger held up a hand, a smile tugging at his lips, despite the shock still in his eyes. "It's all right. I've been used for worse purposes than helping a lady avoid an unwanted conversation." He paused. "Though, I'll admit, this is the first time I've been kissed as a diversionary tactic." "I'm not usually the kind of woman who kisses strangers on hilltops," Maeve said desperately. "I promise, I'm normally quite sensible and proper, and—" "You're grieving?" he said quietly, and the understanding in his voice made Maeve's throat tighten. "And someone is making that grief harder instead of easier. I don't need explanations." They stood in awkward silence. The wind calmed slightly, and Maeve could finally see him clearly in the fading light. Strong features, kind eyes, the bearing of someone used to respect, but not demanding it. "I'm Lachlan," he offered, "just passing through the area on business." Maeve, Maeve Sinclair. She pulled her shawl tighter. I should go. Thank you for not being horrified by my behaviour. I've been to far more horrifying social events in London, I assure you. His smile was genuine. Mrs. Sinclair, may I ask, are you safe? From your brother-in-law, I mean. The question surprised her. He's not dangerous, just angry. He loved his brother, and he blames me for not being perfect enough to save Robert from himself. Lachlan's expression shifted to something Maeve couldn't quite read. Grief makes people cruel sometimes, especially when they can't admit they're angry at the person who died. The words hit too close. Maeve felt tears threaten and turned away. I should go. Of course. He stepped back, giving her space. Though for what it's worth, Mrs. Sinclair, I don't think you're the kind of woman who needs to apologise for being human. Maeve walked back down the hill in a daze. She'd kissed a stranger. She was still in mourning, still wore black every day, still loved Robert despite his gambling and his promises he never kept. And yet that one forbidden kiss had made her feel something she'd thought was dead. The possibility that life could still surprise her. She pushed the feeling away as madness, a moment she'd never repeat. Lachlan Fraser, Duke of Kilmuir, rode back to his lodge, thinking about amber eyes and honest grief. He'd come to the Highlands to inspect land for a proposed railway line cold business, surveys and profit calculations. Instead, he'd met the first person in months who'd looked him in the eye and seen just a man, not a title. He told himself to forget it. She was grieving. He was half promised to a London match his mother had arranged. One impulsive kiss on a Highland hill meant nothing. But as he poured whiskey in his empty lodge, Lachlan couldn't stop wondering about the woman who'd apologised for being alive. 2. The next morning, Maeve tried to resume normal life. She cleaned the cottage, helped Mrs. Macready at the village inn for extra income, and avoided Angus's pointed glares across the kirkyard. The village was buzzing with news. The Duke of Kilmuir was visiting to decide about the railway line. Some crofters were excited about jobs and modernisation. Others feared losing their homes to progress. Maeve paid little attention until she carried tea to the inn's dining room and saw him. Lachlan, except he wasn't just Lachlan. He sat at the head table in travelling clothes that were too fine for comfort, discussing survey maps with his factor. The Duke of Kilmuir, the man she'd kissed on the hill. The tray slipped from Maeve's hands. Tea and china crashed to the floor in a spectacular mess. Every head turned. Lachlan's eyes met hers, and she saw the exact moment he recognised her. Shock flickered across his face, followed by something that might have been laughter desperately suppressed. Mrs. Sinclair, Mrs. Macready hurried over. What on earth? I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. Maeve dropped to her knees, gathering broken pieces with shaking hands. No harm done, Lachlan said smoothly, rising. His voice was perfectly composed, ducal. Accidents happen, though perhaps we should properly introduce ourselves, as we'll be neighbours of a sort while I'm here. Mrs. Macready beamed. Your Grace, this is Mrs. Sinclair. Her late husband Robert was a crofter here. She helps me at the inn. Maeve, this is His Grace, the Duke of Kilmuir. Your Grace. Maeve's tongue tangled on the words. I'm honoured to, that is, welcome to, our something. She saw his lips twitch. Thank you, Mrs. Sinclair. I look forward to learning more about the area. The emphasis on her name was slight but deliberate. They were both pretending to meet for the first time, and the absurdity of it made Maeve want to laugh hysterically or crawl under the table. She escaped to the kitchen as soon as possible, leaving Mrs. Macready to fuss over the Duke. The day deteriorated further when Angus arrived, realised the shadowy figure on the hill last night had likely been this very Duke, and his resentment crystallised into something uglier. So, the Grand Duke of Kilmuir, Angus said loudly enough for half the inn to hear, here to decide which of us loses our homes for his railway profits. Another privileged man playing with common folks' lives. Lachlan's expression remained neutral. I'm here to assess options, Mr. Sinclair. No decisions have been made. But they will be. And we know how those decisions always favour the titled and wealthy, don't we? Angus's gaze slid to Maeve. Some people understand that better than others. Maeve felt her face burn. She fled before anyone could see tears. Over the following days, Lachlan toured the land with his factor. He'd expected to see terrain and calculate costs. Instead, he kept seeing faces, elderly crofters, whose families had worked this land for generations, children playing outside cottages that might be demolished. The intricate web of community that numbers on a ledger never showed. He'd made decisions from London before, confident in his stewardship. Now he wondered how many lives he'd disrupted without seeing them. And he kept crossing paths with Maeve in small, unavoidable ways. She brought tea to his table. He asked practical questions about the old crofts. She corrected his pronunciation of a Gaelic place name with barely suppressed amusement. It's Ben More, Your Grace, not Ben More, You're calling the mountain Big Death instead of Big Hill. That would explain why the surveyor looked horrified. Lachlan smiled. Any other inadvertent insults I should know about? Well, you told Mrs. Macready her scones were dubrique yesterday. You meant delicious, I think. You actually said black speckled. Despite herself, Maeve laughed. Your boots suggest you found all our bogs personally. Lachlan looked down at his ruined leather. I have a gift for finding the wettest possible route across any landscape. The banter was easy, natural, and completely inappropriate for a grieving widow and a duke with responsibilities. Maeve reminded herself of that every night as she lay awake, feeling guilty for noticing how kind his eyes were, how he actually listened when she spoke. Lachlan, in his lodge, tried to focus on survey reports, but kept staring at moonlit hills, wondering why a woman who'd kissed him out of panic suddenly mattered more than any society lady his mother had paraded through London drawing rooms. 3. Angus appeared at Maeve's cottage door with a solicitor's letter, his face grim. Robert's debts are worse than we knew. Gambling debts from before he died, substantial ones. If we can't pay, the cottage may be seized when the railway comes through. The Duke's probably counting on buying it cheap. Maeve felt the world tilt. How much? The sum Angus named made her stomach drop. Robert had promised her the gambling was under control, that he'd stopped after their wedding. Another lie in a marriage built on love and broken promises. This is your fault, Angus said bitterly. You encouraged his soft heart, made him think he didn't need to be practical. He gambled trying to make enough to give you pretty things you never needed. That's not fair. Fair? You want to talk about fair? Angus's voice rose. My brother is dead. You're already throwing yourself at dukes on hillsides, and I'm left cleaning up the mess. Some widow you are. He slammed out, leaving Maeve shaking with guilt and fury. She'd known Robert struggled with cards. She'd watched him promise to quit, had believed him every time. She'd loved him despite his flaws, but now those flaws threatened to take even her home. Lachlan, visiting the village to speak with Crofters, heard raised voices from Maeve's cottage. He arrived in time to see Angus storm past, muttering about widows who move on too quickly and dukes sniffing around where they don't belong. Later, Lachlan found Maeve at the loch's edge, throwing stones with too much force. He stayed at a respectful distance, just present, until she chose to speak. "He left me debts," Maeve said finally, her voice flat. "My husband, the man I loved. He gambled everything and left me with nothing but bills and a cottage I'll probably lose anyway. I'm sorry. I'm angry at him. I'm angry at a dead man, and that makes me horrible, doesn't it?" She threw another stone. "I loved Robert. I mourned him properly. But I'm also furious that he kept lying to me, kept promising to change, and died before I could make him keep those promises." Lachlan moved closer, but didn't touch her. "Grief isn't clean. People want it to be a proper progression from sorrow to acceptance. But real grief is messy. You can love someone and be angry at them simultaneously." "How do you know?" "My father," Lachlan said quietly. "Good man, terrible at showing affection. Died when I was 20. I grieved him and resented him for years, felt guilty for both feelings. Eventually learned they could coexist." Maeve looked at him, really looked, and saw understanding instead of judgment. "And now?" she asked. "You're here to decide about the railway, to potentially take homes, including mine, for progress." "I'm here to assess options. I don't know yet what's right." He met her eyes. "I'm expected to marry a well-born English woman. I've met exactly twice. Secure political connections, produce heirs, fulfill obligations. I'm tired of being a title instead of a person." The honesty hung between them. Then a stubborn sheep wandered through, nearly shoving Maeve into the water. Lachlan grabbed her arm to steady her. They stumbled together, faces suddenly close, and for a heartbeat, Maeve thought he'd kiss her again. They both pulled back, breathless. "This can't happen," Maeve said. "I'm in mourning. You're half promised. The village would never forgive either of us." "I know. We should be nothing more than acquaintances." "Friends, perhaps?" Lachlan offered. They both knew it was already too much, but they agreed anyway. Lachlan quietly instructed his factor to explore alternative railway routes that might spare the worst of the Crofts and Maeve's cottage. He didn't tell her, didn't want her to think he was buying her favour or her silence about that kiss. Over the next weeks, Maeve found herself relying on their conversations more than she admitted. For the first time since Robert's death, she laughed, really laughed, when Lachlan attempted Gaelic and accidentally called himself a wet sheep instead of stranger. "The word you want is coigreach," she said, fighting giggles. "You said Cowora flooch. I'm never speaking Gaelic again." "Probably wise, Your Grace. You've also told Mrs. Macready she has beautiful chickens when you meant to compliment her cooking." Despite everything, the debts, the grief, the impossibility, Maeve felt something shift. Not forgetting Robert, but allowing space for something new alongside the memory. It terrified her. End 4. The annual Highland gathering arrived with pipes and drums, and the whole village turning out in their best. Maeve had refused to attend until Mrs. Macready and young Eyelid from the bakers practically dragged her. "Robert loved this gathering," Eyelid insisted. "He'd want you there, Maeve. He'd want you to live, not sit alone with sorrow. I'm still in mourning. It's been 18 months. You're allowed to leave the house for a festival." Mrs. Macready's voice softened. "Child, there's no dishonour in choosing joy again." So Maeve went, still in black but present. The gathering was chaos and colour, children racing, old men arguing about clan history, women selling tablet and shortbread. The air smelled of heather and peat smoke. Lachlan arrived and was immediately roped into trying the caber toss. He lifted the massive log with visible effort, staggered 3 steps, and nearly fell over with it. The crowd roared with laughter, and even Lachlan grinned good-natured about his failure. Maeve felt herself smile. Actually smile, not the careful expression she'd worn for months. Then Angus appeared, already drunk, and cornered her by the ale tent. "Look at you," he sneered. "Not even 2 years, and you're smiling at Dukes, forgetting my brother like he never existed, shaming the Sinclair name, you are." "I haven't forgotten, Robert. Haven't you, out of mourning clothes yet, kissing strangers on hillsides?" His voice rose, drawing attention. "Everyone knows what you are now. Everyone sees it." Maeve felt tears sting. The gathering had gone quiet, people staring. Lachlan appeared beside her, his voice calm but carrying clearly. "Mr. Sinclair, I think you're mistaken about several things." "Am I? You're the Duke she was with that night." "I am. Mrs. Sinclair assisted me when I was lost on the hills. She was entirely proper and helpful, and I'm grateful for her kindness." Lachlan's gaze swept the crowd. "I've met Mrs. Sinclair several times since arriving here. She's carried more responsibility, shown more grace under difficulty than most men I know in London. No one," his voice hardened slightly, "has the right to measure another person's grief by months and clothing. Least of all, someone who's grieving the same man differently." The silence was absolute. Angus's face went red, then pale. "She loved your brother," Lachlan continued quietly. "That doesn't mean she's required to die with him. And frankly, from what I've heard of Robert Sinclair, he'd be ashamed to see his widow bullied this way." Angus stumbled back, something breaking in his face. He turned and walked away, shoulders shaking. Maeve couldn't breathe. Lachlan had just defended her publicly, completely, in front of everyone. The crowd began to murmur, but the tone had shifted. People were looking at Angus with disapproval now, not at her. Later, Lachlan gave his speech about the railway. He stood on the platform, looking more Duke than she'd seen him, but his words surprised everyone. "After walking this land and meeting you all, I've decided to recommend rerouting the main line. It will cost more, take longer, but it will preserve most of the crofts and minimise displacement. This glen has been home to these families for generations. Progress shouldn't require destroying that history." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Some grateful, some suspicious. The widow must have bewitched him. Maeve felt both relief and fresh responsibility. His decision would cost him politically, financially. That evening, the sealid began. Someone pulled Maeve into a reel before she could protest. She stumbled through the steps, stepped on Lachlan's foot when they crossed paths, and they both burst into helpless laughter. "I'm terrible at this," she gasped. "I'm worse. I just trod on Mrs. Macready's hem." They spun through the dance, clumsy and joyful, and Maeve realised she stood at a crossroads. She could stay frozen in guilt and memory, or she could slowly allow herself to live again, to admit that her feelings for this Duke were real, not just the echo of one forbidden kiss. The choice terrified her, but for the first time she thought she might be brave enough to make it. 5. The letter from London arrived 2 days later. Lachlan read it in his lodge, his mother's elegant handwriting, reminding him of expectations, duties, the almost fiancé's family, pushing for an official announcement. He couldn't keep both paths open forever. He rode to Maeve's cottage that afternoon, found her in the garden harvesting herbs. She looked up, saw his expression, and set down her basket. "You're leaving," she said. "I may have to do what's expected." He dismounted, stood awkwardly, holding his horse's reins. "I wanted to tell you properly, not just vanish." Maeve surprised herself by staying calm. "You shouldn't ruin your life to spare my cottage or my feelings, Your Grace. You've already done more than anyone asked." "Is that what you think? That this is about the cottage? Isn't it?" but her voice wavered. They stood in the garden while the horse cropped grass and clouds gathered over the hills. Lachlan took a breath. Maeve, I came to the Highlands to make a business decision. Instead, I met a woman who kissed me out of panic and somehow made me feel more honest than I've been in years. I've spent weeks telling myself it was one impulsive moment that meant nothing. I'm done lying to myself. Maeve's heart hammered. Lachlan, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know that if I go to London and do my duty, it won't be because I don't care. It will be because I'm a coward, choosing the easier path. The words hung between them. Maeve felt something crack open in her chest, the careful wall she'd built around her heart since Robert's death. That evening, alone in her cottage, Maeve stood before her wardrobe. She looked at the black mourning dress she'd worn every day for 18 months. Respectable grief, proper sorrow. She thought about Robert, his laughter, his promises, his failures. She'd loved him truly, but Robert was gone, and she was still here. Slowly, Maeve removed the mourning dress. She pulled out a simple, dark blue gown, respectful, but not a widow's armour. The change felt monumental and tiny all at once. She also made a harder decision. She took the pocket watch Robert had left her won at cards, ironically, and sold it to Mr. MacLeod at the tavern. The money would cover part of the debt. Not all, but enough to show she was taking responsibility, not waiting for rescue. It hurt, but it was her choice. Then Maeve climbed back up to the hill above the loch, to the place where everything had changed with one forbidden kiss. She needed to face it, to decide who she wanted to be. Lachlan, preparing to leave the next day, couldn't resist one last ride past the loch. He saw her on the rock again, but this time she stood straight, not hiding, not fleeing. He rode up, dismounted, joined her on the outcrop where they'd met. I thought you'd be gone by now, Maeve said. I couldn't leave without. He stopped. Without being honest, one more time. They stood side by side, watching the wind ripple across the water. Maeve spoke first. I care for you, deeply. I've been fighting it because I felt guilty, like loving someone new meant betraying Robert, but I've realised something. She turned to face him. I can honour Robert's memory and still choose to live. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. Maeve, but I won't be your escape from duty. If you choose me, it has to be with your eyes open, knowing what it will cost. The scandal, the disapproval, all of it. I won't be a regret you hide in the Highlands. Lachlan took her hands. I don't want to be a duke who only signs papers and obeys expectations. Rerouting that railway showed me I can choose a different kind of leadership, and that includes choosing a wife who challenges me rather than decorates my life. Your mother will be horrified. London will talk. Let them. I've spent 12 years as Duke doing everything right, making every proper choice, being exactly what was expected. I'm tired, Maeve. I want to make one choice that's purely mine. He didn't drop to one knee that felt too fast, too presumptuous for a woman still navigating grief. Instead, he asked something more careful. Maeve Sinclair, will you allow me to court you properly? Not in secret, not as scandal, but as a man who intends to stand beside you, even when the world disapproves. I'm not asking for an answer about marriage now, just permission to try. Maeve felt tears slip down her cheeks. This wasn't rescue, it wasn't a fairy tale. It was two imperfect people choosing each other with full knowledge of the cost. Yes, she whispered, but I'll need time to mourn properly, to be sure, I'll give you all the time you need. Lachlan pulled her close. We'll do this right, slowly, honestly. This time, when he kissed her, it wasn't forbidden or accidental. it was chosen. Soft, steady, carrying the weight of two people who knew exactly what they were risking and decided it was worth it. Down in the village, Mrs. Macready saw their silhouettes against the evening sky and nudged eyelid. Maybe the world is changing after all. Angus watched from a distance, his face twisted with pain, but something in him loosened recognition that his anger had been about his own grief, his inability to save his brother, not about Maeve's choices. The story ended not with a grand wedding, but with realistic, hopeful promises. Letters to London explaining Lachlan's intentions. Maeve shifting slowly from deep mourning to half mourning, with the village's gradual acceptance. The railway works beginning with the Crofts intact. The last image was of Maeve and Lachlan walking down the hill together hand in hand. Two people who'd discovered that one forbidden kiss wasn't a mistake, but the moment their real lives began. Not escape, not rescue, just two hearts brave enough to risk everything for the possibility of love that was freely chosen. So, dear friend, Maeve learnt that grief and joy can coexist, and that honouring the past doesn't mean refusing the future. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe to Duke Stories. Have you ever been afraid to let yourself be happy again after loss? Or found the courage to choose love despite the cost? Share your story in the comments I read, everyone. Until next time, may you always have the courage to choose life, even when it feels forbidden.